If you're working with raw files, instead of opening the image into Photoshop and then converting it to a smart object, you can open the raw file directly into Photoshop as a smart object. And this will give you access to the raw data if you need to make changes. In Bridge, I'm going to select the Iceland.dng file, double-click on it in order to open it in RAW, and then I'll hold down the Shift key, which will change the Open Image to Open Object. Selecting Open Object opens the file into Photoshop as a smart object, and I can see that by looking at the Layers panel. Here's the icon for the smart object, and it's not a background layer. If I want to make changes to the file, I can choose Layer, and then Smart Objects, edit the contents, or I can simply double-click on the thumbnail for the smart object in the Layers panel. That brings up the Camera Raw dialog, where I'll click Auto in order to automatically adjust the image, giving me a little bit more information in my shadow areas. I'll go ahead and increase that even a little bit more and click OK. So the advantage here is that I'm not shuffling around a pixel layer that I had already brought into Photoshop. Instead, I'm actually re-rendering the raw data. So when I placed the raw file, all of that content of that file came into this document, and when I save it as either a PSD or as a TIFF file, the raw file is going to be embedded inside of it. Now let's add another image as a raw file. To do so, I'm going to choose File and then Place Embedded. I'll navigate to the right folder, in this case, the Smart Objects folder, and choose PaintTexture.dng. That will open it in Camera Raw. I'll click OK, and it automatically places it as a smart object. I'll tap the check mark to apply the transformation, and we can see the icon for the smart object in the Layers panel. Now to blend these layers together, I'm going to change the blend mode to Multiply, but we can see the image gets much too dark. To make edits, I'll double-click on the thumbnail for the Paint Texture. That will bring up Camera Raw. I'll move to the Lens Corrections panel and remove Chromatic Aberration and enable Profile Corrections, which will remove the vignetting along the edges of the image. I'll go to the Basic panel and just warm the temperature a little bit and increase the exposure and apply those changes. So again, instead of just applying and mixing up the pixel data, Photoshop is actually going into the raw file and changing the raw data. I think the texture is being applied a little bit too heavily, so I'll decrease the opacity in the Layers panel. But again, making a change to something like opacity or blend mode changes the way that the image looks in the canvas area. So if I need to make more changes, all I have to do is double-click to edit the contents. I'm going to make the exposure a little bit darker. I'm going to come down and add a little bit of saturation. Because I'm working with this raw image, I don't have to worry about degrading the quality of my images, so I really have a lot of flexibility. Now I'll save this file using Command S. I'll save it as Iceland Composite. Save it into the Smart Objects folder as a layered PSD file and click Save. When we return to Bridge, we can see there's my Iceland Composite, and while the changes that I made in the Camera Raw dialog box when I was opening the file have been applied to the Iceland DNG files, the other adjustments that we made after bringing those raw files into the PSD file are not reflected in those original images. So I really appreciate the flexibility that I get when I bring the raw files into Photoshop as smart objects. I can always reprocess them and I don't lose any image quality, which can be really important, especially when we start compositing images together.